Female diver saves drowning man at a beach. 3 hours later, 5 helicopters landed at the beach looking for her. Have you ever saved someone, only to realize that moment would change the entire course of your life? Would you still do it, knowing what comes after? Let me know in the comments. She thought it was just another quiet morning by the water. Amira Lane, a caramel-skinned diving instructor who loved the ocean more than people, had no idea that the man she pulled from the waves was Nolan Creed, reclusive billionaire CEO and the center of a national manhunt. 3 hours later, helicopters swarmed the beach, but not to rescue anyone. They came for her. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, let me say something really personal to me right now. We spend hours making these videos and hope that they reach a lot of people around the world. One of my goals is to share valuable lessons about love, humility, and kindness so we can have a better world. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you for being part of this growing community. Let us begin. The sun hung low over Blue Horizon Beach, painting the waves in hues of gold and amber. Amira Lane glided through the water, her body slicing through the ocean with the grace of someone who belonged to it. Her braided hair trailed behind her like dark ribbons, and her red diving suit clung to her caramel skin. To her, the ocean was more than a place. It was a sanctuary, a world where the noise of people and their complications faded into silence. She'd been free diving for years, teaching others to navigate the depths. But mornings like this were hers alone. Just her and the sea. Beneath the surface, the world was alive. Schools of fish darted past, their scales catching the filtered sunlight. Amira's lungs burned, but she pushed deeper, savoring the quiet. Then something caught her eye, a shadow, too large to be a fish, thrashing in the distance. Her pulse quickened. She kicked toward it, her movements swift but controlled. As she drew closer, the shape became clear. A man, limbs flailing, caught in a rip current that dragged him toward the open sea. Amira didn't hesitate. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around his chest. He was heavy, his body limp, and the current fought her every move. Her thighs burned as she kicked against it, pulling him toward the surface. The ocean seemed to claw at them, reluctant to let go. When they finally broke through, she gasped, gulping air, and dragged him toward the shore. The beach was nearly empty, save for a few early joggers and a fisherman casting his line. Amira hauled the man onto the sand, her arms trembling from the effort. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. She pressed her fingers to his neck, faint pulse. Without a second thought, she began CPR, her hands rhythmic against his chest. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Come on, she muttered, her voice low, urgent. Don't make me drag you all this way for nothing. After what felt like an eternity, his chest heaved. He coughed, water spilling from his mouth, and his eyes fluttered open. They were a striking green, wide with confusion, locking onto her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the world. You're real, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the waves. Amira froze, caught off guard. His words were strange, almost reverent, like he'd seen a ghost. She shook it off, sitting back on her heels. Yeah, I'm real. And you're lucky to be alive. He tried to sit up, wincing, but she pressed a hand to his shoulder. Stay down. You need to rest. I owe you, he said, his gaze still fixed on her. There was something intense about him, something that made her skin prickle. Not with fear, but with unease. His clothes, though soaked, were tailored, expensive, not the usual beachgoer. She stood, brushing sand from her knees. Just don't go swimming in currents you can't handle. That's payment enough. He opened his mouth to say more, but she was already walking away, her bare feet leaving prints in the wet sand. Attention wasn't her thing. She didn't need his gratitude, didn't want his story. The ocean was calling her back, and she had no patience for complications. As she reached the edge of the beach, where the sand gave way to rocky cliffs, she glanced over her shoulder. He was sitting up now, watching her, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. Something about the way he stared made her stomach twist. She turned away, quickening her pace. Back at her small rental cabin a mile from the beach, Amira stripped off her diving suit and stood under the shower, letting the hot water rinse away the salt and the morning's chaos. Her mind kept drifting to the man, his strange words, his piercing eyes. "You're real?" What kind of question was that? She shook her head, toweling off and pulling on a loose shirt and shorts. Probably just shock, she told herself. People say weird things when they almost die. She brewed coffee, the aroma filling the tiny kitchen, and sat at the weathered table by the window. The view of the ocean usually calmed her, but today it felt different. Restless. She sipped her coffee, trying to shake the unease. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she frowned. No one texted her this early. The screen showed an unknown number. "You saved me. I owe you more than my life." Her breath caught. She set the mug down, her fingers hovering over the screen. How did he get her number? She hadn't given it to him, hadn't even told him her name. Her first instinct was to block the number, but something stopped her. The words felt heavy, like they carried a weight she couldn't yet understand. "Who is this?" she typed, hesitating before hitting send. No response. She waited, staring at the screen, her coffee growing cold. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. She tossed the phone onto the table and stood, pacing the small room. Her cabin was sparse, driftwood shelves, a few books, a single photo of her mother smiling on a boat. No clutter, no ties. That's how she liked it. But now the simplicity felt exposed, like a stranger had walked into her world and left the door ajar. She grabbed her sandals and headed back to the beach, needing the ocean's rhythm to ground her. The sand was warmer now, the morning crowd starting to gather. Families with umbrellas, surfers waxing their boards. Amira kept her head down, her braided hair swinging as she walked. She wasn't one for small talk, and the locals knew her well enough to give her space. As she reached the spot where she'd pulled the man from the water, she stopped. The sand was smooth, no trace of their struggle. She crouched, running her fingers through it, as if looking for proof it had happened. A shadow fell over her. Amira, right? She stood quickly, turning to face a woman she didn't recognize. The stranger was in her 40s, with sharp features and a clipboard clutched to her chest. Her smile was too polished, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "Do I know you?" Amira asked, her tone guarded. The woman's smile didn't falter. "No, but I've heard about you. Diving instructor, loves the ocean. I'm Clara, freelance journalist. I was hoping to ask you about what happened here this morning." Amira's jaw tightened. "Nothing happened." Clara raised an eyebrow, glancing at the sand. "Really? Because I heard you saved a man's life. That's not nothing." "I don't do interviews," Amira said, stepping past her. "Find someone else to bother." Clara called after her. "He's someone important, you know. You might want to talk before this gets bigger than you." Amira kept walking, her heart pounding. Important. She didn't care who he was. She just wanted her morning back, her quiet life untouched. But Clara's words clung to her, and that text, those cryptic words, burned in her mind. By noon, the beach was bustling, but Amira stayed near the cliffs, sitting on a flat rock with her knees drawn up. She watched the waves, trying to piece together why the man's rescue felt like the start of something she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "They're coming for you. Be careful." Her blood ran cold. She typed back, "Who are you?" What's going on? But the message wouldn't send. The number was blocked, gone, like it had never existed. She stood, scanning the beach. Families laughed, seagulls circled, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. She didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing. She wasn't safe here anymore. Would you save a stranger even if it meant your quiet life could never be the same? Let us know in the comments. And if you're loving these stories, hit that subscribe button so we can keep them coming. The beach was no longer her sanctuary. 3 hours after the rescue, the sky erupted with the roar of rotors. 5 helicopters descended, their blades slicing the air, kicking up sand and chaos. Tourists screamed, grabbing their belongings, while locals stood frozen, shielding their eyes against the wind. Amira, hidden behind a cluster of rocks, watched as armed men in dark suits poured from the helicopters. They moved with precision, fanning out across the beach, their voices sharp as they questioned anyone in their path. "Have you seen a woman with braided hair and a red diving suit?" one of them barked at a surfer, who shook his head, wide-eyed. Amira's heart hammered. Her diving suit was back at the cabin, but her braided hair was unmistakable. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her mind racing. Why were they looking for her? What had she done other than save a man's life? She thought of the text. "They're coming for you." Her fingers tightened around her phone. She didn't trust powerful people, hadn't since she was a teenager, when a wealthy man had promised her mother the world and left them with nothing but debt and a broken boat. Power meant control, and control meant danger. She needed to move. The rocks wouldn't hide her forever. She edged along the cliff, keeping low, her bare feet silent against the stone. The helicopters hovered like vultures, their noise drowning out the waves. She reached a narrow path that led to the road and slipped away, her breath ragged. Back at her cabin, she locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it bought her time. She grabbed her diving suit and stuffed it into a bag, along with her wallet and keys. Her hands shook as she dialed her friend Kofi, the only person she trusted in town. "Amira, you okay?" His voice was warm, steady, but she could hear the concern. "No," she said, keeping her voice low. "Something's wrong. There are people looking for me, men with guns, helicopters. I don't know why." "Helicopters?" Kofi's tone sharpened. "Where are you?" "My place. I'm leaving. Can you meet me at the old dock?" "On my way. Stay safe, Amira." She hung up, her eyes darting to the window. The street was quiet, but she didn't trust it. She slung the bag over her shoulder and opened the back door, stepping into the alley. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel. She moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, her mind replaying the morning. The man's face, Nolan Creed, the text had called him, a billionaire, a CEO. Why was he here, alone, caught in a current? And why was she the one paying for saving him? At the old dock, Kofi was waiting, his fishing boat bobbing in the water. He was tall, with a weathered face and eyes that saw more than he let on. "What the hell's going on?" he asked, helping her aboard. "I don't know," she admitted, dropping her bag. "I saved a guy this morning. Now people are after me. He sent me a text, Kofi. He said he owes me, and then he warned me." Kofi's brow furrowed. "Who is this guy?" "Someone with money. Too much of it." She pulled out her phone, showing him the messages. "What do I do?" He studied the screen, his jaw tight. "You need to disappear for a while. Lay low. I've got a friend with a place up the coast. No one will find you there." She nodded, but her stomach twisted. Running felt wrong, like admitting she'd done something to deserve this. But staying was worse. "Okay, let's go." As the boat pulled away from the dock, Amira looked back at Blue Horizon Beach. The helicopters were still there, circling, their lights cutting through the dusk. She didn't know who Nolan Creed was, or why his life had turned hers upside down. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and unyielding. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a trap. The boat cut through the darkening waves, its engine a low hum beneath the cries of distant gulls. Amira sat at the stern, her bag clutched to her chest, the wind whipping her braided hair. Kofi steered in silence, his eyes scanning the horizon. The lights of Blue Horizon Beach faded behind them, but the roar of those helicopters still echoed in her mind. She glanced at her phone, the cryptic texts glowing on the screen. "You saved me. I owe you more than my life." And then, "They're coming for you. Be careful." Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she didn't know what to say or who she was even talking to. Nolan Creed. The name felt like a stone in her gut, heavy with implications she couldn't yet grasp. "You sure about this?" Kofi asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Running, I mean. You didn't do anything wrong." Amira's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. People like him, people with that kind of power, they don't care about right or wrong. They just take what they want." Kofi nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "We'll get you to the safe house. After that, we figure out what he wants." She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the water. The ocean had always been her refuge, but now it felt like it was hiding something that had latched onto her the moment she pulled Nolan from its depths. She didn't know why he'd been out there, alone, or why his rescue had unleashed this chaos. But she knew one thing. She wasn't safe until she understood who he was and what he wanted from her. Far from the coast, in a sprawling compound perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, Nolan Creed sat in a dimly lit study, his hands gripping the arms of a leather chair. The room was stark. Glass walls, a single desk, no personal touches. His tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple black sweater, but the intensity in his green eyes hadn't faded. He stared at a blank wall, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the morning in vivid detail. The suffocating pull of the current, the darkness closing in. And then her, Amira, her face sharp and determined, her hands dragging him back to life. "Sir?" A man in a crisp suit stood at the door, his tablet glowing in the low light. The team's still searching the beach, no sign of her yet. Nolan's voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. "Find her. But don't scare her. She's not a threat. She's the opposite." The man, Elliot, his head of security, hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, we don't know who she is. She could be involved." "She's not," Nolan snapped, his eyes flashing. "She saved my life. That's all you need to know." Elliot nodded, retreating with a quiet, "Yes, sir." The door clicked shut, leaving Nolan alone again. He leaned back, closing his eyes, but her face was still there. Caramel skin, dark braids, eyes that held no fear, only resolve. He didn't know her name then, hadn't known anything about her, but the moment he'd woken on that beach, coughing up seawater, he'd felt something shift. She wasn't just a stranger. She was a lifeline. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him back. A message from an encrypted line. No trace of her at the cabin. Locals say she keeps to herself. Diving instructor, Amira Lane. Nolan's lips twitched, the name settling into him like a missing piece. "Amira." He typed a quick reply. "Keep looking," discreetly. Then he set the phone down and stood, pacing to the glass wall that overlooked the ocean. The view was endless, but it brought no peace. His mind drifted, unbidden, to a different time. 3 years ago, when his world had collapsed. He saw her face, not Amira's, but hers, Lila, his ex-fiancée, smiling for the cameras while she sold his secrets to the highest bidder. The headlines had been relentless. Billionaire betrayed. Creed's empire rocked by scandal. He'd trusted her, let her into his tightly guarded life, and she'd turned it into a circus. The media had feasted on his pain, and the world he'd built, His company, his privacy, had nearly crumbled. Since then, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd retreated, become a ghost, a name whispered in boardrooms but rarely seen. Until today. Until Amira. He pressed a hand to the glass, the cold grounding him. Why had he been out there, swimming alone in waters he knew were dangerous? He didn't have an answer, not one he could face. Maybe he'd wanted to feel something, anything, other than the weight of his own isolation. And then she'd appeared, pulling him from the abyss, her strength and defiance cutting through the fog of his life. "Sir?" Elliot's voice crackled through the intercom. "We've got a lead. A fisherman saw her leaving with a man on a boat. We're tracking it now." Nolan's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Good. Follow it, but don't engage. I want to know where she's going." "Understood." He turned away from the window, his mind racing. Amira didn't know who he was, didn't know the storm she'd stepped into by saving him. But he owed her, not just his life, but the truth. And he'd find her, no matter what it took. Back on the boat, Amira's phone buzzed again. She hesitated, then checked it. Another unknown number, but this time the message was different. "Amira, it's Nolan. I'm sorry for the chaos. I just want to talk. Please." Her breath hitched. How did he know her name? And why did his words feel like a plea, not a demand? She didn't respond, but the message lingered, a thread she couldn't cut. Kofi glanced over. "You okay?" "No," she said, her voice barely above the engine's hum. "But I will be." The boat sped on, the safe house waiting. But Amira knew deep down that safety was an illusion. Nolan Creed wasn't just a man she'd saved, he was a mystery, and she was already tangled in it. The boat rocked gently as it neared the secluded cove, the safe house just a shadow against the rocky shore. Amira's grip on her phone tightened, Nolan's latest message burning in her mind. "Amira, it's Nolan. I'm sorry for the chaos. I just want to talk. Please." His words felt too personal, too urgent, like he knew her beyond the fleeting moment on the beach. She hadn't replied, but the weight of his plea clung to her, stirring a mix of curiosity and dread. The ocean stretched dark and endless around them, no longer her sanctuary, but a vast, unreadable map of secrets. Kofi cut the engine, letting the boat drift toward the dock. "We're here," he said, his voice low. "You sure you don't want me to stay?" Amira shook her head, forcing a small smile. "I'll be fine. Just keep your phone on, okay?" He nodded, his eyes searching hers. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." "I know." But she was already stepping onto the dock, her bag slung over her shoulder. Alone was how she worked best, no ties, no complications. Except now she was tethered to a man she didn't understand, and the helicopters, the armed men, the texts. They were all threads pulling her towards something she couldn't escape. The safe house was a small cabin tucked among pines, its windows dark. Amira slipped inside, locking the door behind her. The air smelled of cedar and damp earth. She dropped her bag and sank onto a creaky couch, her mind racing. Nolan Creed, a billionaire, a man who'd looked at her like she was more than a stranger. And now he was searching for her, not to thank her, she sensed, but for something deeper, something that made her skin prickle. Her phone buzzed, not with a text, but a call. She tensed, then relaxed when she saw the name. Zadie, her best friend, the only person besides Kofi who could read her silences. "Amira, what the hell is going on?" Zadie's voice was sharp, laced with worry. "Kofi called me, said you're running from something. Helicopters, men with guns." Amira exhaled, leaning her head back. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it. Start talking." She hesitated, then let it spill. The rescue, Nolan's strange words, the helicopters, the texts. Zadie listened, her silence heavy. When Amira finished, Zadie's tone was low, serious. "Mira, you don't just walk away from a man like that. You saved Nolan Creed. He's not some random guy. He's a ghost with more money than God and a past that's all shadows. People like him don't let go." Amira's chest tightened. "I didn't ask for this. I just pulled him out of the water." "Yeah, and now you're on his radar. That's not a place you want to be." She stood, pacing the small room. "I've saved lives before, Zadie. Tourists, locals, kids caught in riptides. This one feels different." He looked at me like he knew me. And those messages, he's not just grateful. It's like he's desperate. Zadie's voice softened. "You're scared, aren't you?" Amira didn't answer right away. Fear wasn't something she admitted easily. She'd faced storms, currents, sharks, but this was a human kind of danger, the kind that didn't follow rules. "I don't know what he wants," she said finally, "but I'm not waiting to find out. Be careful, okay? And call me if you need me." "I will." She hung up, the cabin's quiet pressing in. Zadie's warning echoed. "You don't just walk away from a man like that." Amira didn't want to run, but staying still felt like inviting the storm to her door. She didn't sleep that night, her mind too restless. By dawn, she knew she couldn't stay at the safe house forever. She needed answers about Nolan, about why her life had become a target. Against her better judgment, she decided to return to her apartment, just long enough to grab essentials and cover her tracks. Kofi protested, but she was stubborn. 1 hour, she told him, in and out. The drive back to Blue Horizon Beach was tense, the coastal road winding under a gray sky. When she reached her apartment, the door was ajar. Her heart sank. She pushed it open, her breath shallow. The place was trashed, drawers yanked out, cushions sliced, books scattered across the floor. But it wasn't random. Her laptop was untouched, her small stash of cash still hidden in the coffee can. She moved to the bathroom where she'd left her red diving suit to dry. The hook was empty, her wet diving gear gone. Her pulse raced. Someone had been here looking for something specific. Not valuables, not chaos, just her. The diving suit was a marker, proof of who she was on that beach. They were tracking her, closing in. She grabbed a backpack, stuffing it with clothes, her mother's photo, and her diving knife. She didn't know who they were, Nolan's people or someone else, but she wasn't sticking around to find out. As she slipped out the back door, her phone buzzed, another message from an unknown number. "You can't hide forever. I just want to explain." Her fingers trembled as she typed, "Explain what? Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "Nolan. Meet me. Please, I'll make this right." She stared at the screen, her breath uneven. Every instinct screamed to block the number, to run. But Zadie's words rang in her ears. "You don't just walk away." Nolan wasn't letting go, and neither were the people hunting her. The break-in, the missing gear, it was all connected to him. She didn't trust him, but she needed to know why her life was unraveling. She typed, "Where?" and hit send before she could change her mind. The response was immediate. Blue Horizon Beach. Midnight. Alone. Amira slipped the phone into her pocket, her jaw tight. She didn't know if she was walking into a trap or a truth, but one thing was certain. The beach, her home, was no longer hers. It was a stage, and she was caught in its spotlight. Amira's heart pounded as she slipped away from her ransacked apartment, the weight of Nolan's message burning in her pocket. Blue Horizon Beach. Midnight. Alone. She didn't trust him, didn't trust the desperation in his words, but the break-in, the missing diving gear, had left her no choice. Someone was hunting her, and Nolan Creed was at the center of it. Running hadn't worked, hiding wouldn't either. She needed answers, even if it meant facing him on that beach. But midnight was hours away, and she wasn't going to sit still, waiting like prey. She needed to move, to think, to reclaim some shred of control. Kofi was waiting in his truck a block away, his face etched with worry. "You're insane going back there," he said as she climbed in. "Your place was torn apart. What's next?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "But I can't just disappear. Not yet." He drove her to a friend's place outside town, a small house tucked behind a grove of palms. "Stay low," he warned. "I'll check the beach, see if anyone's watching it." She nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere. She couldn't shake the image of her diving suit, gone, taken like a trophy. Whoever had it knew her, knew the woman who'd saved Nolan. And Nolan, with his cryptic texts and his helicopters, was pulling her into a world she'd spent years avoiding. Power, wealth, secrets. She hated it, but she couldn't outrun it anymore. By late afternoon, restlessness drove her out of the house. She couldn't stay cooped up, not with her thoughts spiraling. She borrowed a bike and pedaled to the marine life shelter where she sometimes volunteered, a low-slung building by the shore that smelled of salt and seaweed. The shelter was her other refuge, a place where she could focus on saving something tangible: turtles, seals, creatures that didn't ask questions or send armed men after her. She slipped in quietly, tying her hair back and joining a group cleaning tanks. The work was grounding, the rhythm of scrubbing algae and checking water levels pulling her out of her head. She was elbow-deep in a tank when a shadow fell over her. She tensed, her hand instinctively tightening around the scrub brush, but when she looked up, it wasn't a stranger. It was him, Nolan Creed. He stood in the doorway, his black sweater and jeans a stark contrast to the shelter's bright chaos. His green eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment the world narrowed to just them. The hum of pumps, the chatter of volunteers, all fading into static. Amira stood slowly, wiping her hands on her shorts. Her pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to find you," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low, almost gentle, but there was an urgency behind it. "You didn't show at the beach last night." She bristled, her eyes narrowing. "You think I'd just walk into a trap after your people trashed my apartment, stole my gear?" His brow furrowed, genuine confusion flickering across his face. "My people didn't do that. I told them to find you, not scare you. I swear, Amira, I'm trying to fix this." "Fix what?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "You don't even know me, but you've got helicopters circling my life, men with guns asking for me. What do you want, Nolan?" He glanced around, ensuring no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" She hesitated, every instinct screaming to walk away. But his eyes, those same eyes that had stared at her on the beach, raw and unguarded, held her in place. There was something real there, something that didn't match the billionaire CEO she'd read about online. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Outside, 5 minutes." They stepped onto the shelter's back deck, where the ocean stretched out, gray and restless under a cloudy sky. The wind carried the tang of salt, and Amira leaned against the railing, keeping distance between them. Nolan stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his posture less polished than she'd expected. He looked human. Tired, like a man carrying too much. "I owe you the truth," he started, his voice soft but firm. "That morning when you found me, I wasn't just caught in a current, I was ready to let go." Her breath caught, but she didn't let it show. "You didn't look like a man trying to die. You looked like one trying to disappear." He let out a short, bitter laugh, his gaze dropping to the deck. "Maybe you're right. I don't know anymore. My life. It's not what people think. Money, power, it's all a cage, and I've been running from it for years." She studied him, searching for a lie, but his words felt raw, undot contact lens removed. Why me, then? Why drag me into your mess? Because you saw me, he said, meeting her eyes. Not the name, not the money, just me. You pulled me back, Amira, and now I can't stop seeing you. Her chest tightened, a flush creeping up her neck. His words were too much, too intense, and yet they stirred something she didn't want to name. She looked away, focusing on the waves. You don't know me, Nolan, and I don't trust people like you. People like me. There was a flicker of pain in his voice, but he didn't push. I get it. I've given you no reason to. But someone else is after you, Amira. Not me. Someone who knows you saved me and wants to use that. I'm trying to find out who. She turned back to him, her jaw tight. My apartment was broken into. My diving gear was taken. That's not random. Someone's hunting me, and it started with you. His face darkened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. I didn't know about the break-in, but I'll find out who did it. I promise. Promises don't mean much when I'm the one running, she said, her voice sharp. But even as she spoke, she felt the pull between them, a current she couldn't ignore. He was close now, close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. It was dangerous, this feeling, like standing at the edge of a cliff. You don't have to run, he said, stepping closer. Let me help you. She laughed, short and sharp. Help me? You're the reason I'm in this. Maybe, he admitted, his voice low. But I'm also the only one who'll stand between you and whoever's coming. Her breath hitched, the air between them charged. She could feel the heat of him, the way his presence filled the space. She wanted to push him away, to run, but her feet stayed rooted. I don't need saving, Nolan, she said, but her voice was softer now, less certain. I know, he said, his gaze unwavering. But maybe I do. The words hung there, raw and unguarded. For a moment, neither moved, the tension coiling tighter. She could step forward, close the distance, and she knew he'd meet her halfway. But the weight of everything, her trashed apartment, the helicopters, the texts, pulled her back. She stepped away, breaking the spell. I need time, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. And I need you to stop chasing me. He nodded, though his eyes said he didn't want to agree. I'll give you time, but I'm not going anywhere, Amira. Not until I know you're safe. She turned back to the ocean, her heart pounding. We'll see. As he walked away, his footsteps fading on the deck, Amira gripped the railing, her knuckles white. The chemistry between them was undeniable, a spark that could ignite or destroy. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not yet. Someone was still out there, watching, waiting. And until she knew who, Nolan Creed was both her shield and her storm. Amira watched Nolan's silhouette fade into the shelter's chaos, his words lingering like salt on her skin. I'm not going anywhere, Amira. Not until I know you're safe. Her fingers tightened on the railing, the ocean's restless churn mirroring the storm inside her. The pull between them was undeniable, a current that threatened to drag her under. But trust was a jagged edge she wasn't ready to grasp. Someone had broken into her apartment, stolen her diving gear, and turned her quiet life into a manhunt. Nolan might not be the hunter, but he was the spark that started it all. She turned back to the tanks, scrubbing harder, as if she could scrub away the heat of his gaze. The sky darkened as she worked, clouds rolling in heavy and fast. By the time she finished, the shelter was nearly empty, volunteers scattering as thunder rumbled in the distance. Amira stepped outside, the air thick with the promise of rain. She needed to get back to Kofi's friend's place, but the bike she'd borrowed was no match for the coming storm. She hesitated, scanning the shore, when a voice cut through the wind. Amira, wait! She turned, her pulse spiking. Nolan stood by the shelter's side entrance, his sweater damp from the first drops of rain. You shouldn't be out here, he said, his eyes scanning the sky. Storm's coming in fast. I can handle a little rain, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The wind was picking up, whipping her braids against her face. He stepped closer, his expression serious. Not this one. Come with me. There's a boat shelter nearby. We can wait it out. She wanted to argue, to keep the distance she'd fought for, but the first crack of lightning split the sky, and the rain came down in sheets. She nodded, reluctant, and followed him along the shore to a small wooden structure tucked against the dunes. The boat shelter was cramped, smelling of tar and weathered wood, with a single lantern flickering on a shelf. Nolan shut the door behind them, the storm's roar muffled but relentless. Inside, the space felt too small, their proximity electric. Amira leaned against a stack of crates, her arms crossed, water dripping from her clothes. Nolan stood by the door, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes fixed on her. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rain hammering the roof. "You don't give up, do you?" she said, her voice sharp but unsteady. "I told you I need time." "I know," he said, running a hand through his wet hair. "But I can't stop thinking about you, not since that beach. You saved me, Amira, and I don't just mean from the water." Her chest tightened, his words slicing through her defenses. She looked away, focusing on the lantern's glow. "Stop saying things like that. You don't know me." "Then tell me," he said, stepping closer. "Who's Amira Lane? Why do you love the ocean so much? Why do you keep everyone at arm's length?" She laughed, short and bitter. "You don't get to ask that when you're the one who brought helicopters to my beach." He winced, but didn't back down. "Fair. But I'm here now, and I'm not hiding. Ask me anything. I owe you that." She studied him, the lantern casting shadows across his face. He looked vulnerable, stripped of the billionaire armor she'd expected. Against her better judgment, she asked, "Why were you out there that morning?" "Really?" He exhaled, leaning against the wall. "I haven't told anyone this, not even my team." He paused, his voice low. 3 years ago, my ex-fiancée, Lila, sold trade secrets from my company to a rival. It wasn't just business, it was personal. She betrayed me, turned my life into a media circus. I lost everything that mattered. Trust, privacy, myself. I vanished because I couldn't face it anymore. That morning, I didn't care if I came back. His words hung in the air, raw and heavy. Amira's throat tightened. She knew betrayal, knew the way it carved out pieces of you. "So you swam out to lose yourself," she said softly. "But you fought when I pulled you out." "Because of you," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You were there, real and fierce, and I couldn't let go." Her breath caught, the air between them charged. She wanted to push back, to keep the wall up, but his honesty cracked something open. "You want to know me?" she said, her voice quieter. "Fine. My brother, Jalen, drowned when I was 16. He was a diver, like me, but he got trapped in a net. A corrupt official took a bribe to let an illegal fishing operation go unchecked. Jalen paid the price. The ocean's my home, but it's also where I lost him. I save people because I couldn't save him." Nolan's face softened, pain flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Amira. I didn't know." "No one does," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't talk about it, but you asked." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the damp chill. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me, for saving me." The lantern flickered, casting their shadows on the wall. The storm raged outside, but inside the world shrank to just them. Amira's heart pounded, her defenses crumbling. His hand brushed hers, tentative, and she didn't pull away. The touch was electric, a spark that ignited something she'd buried deep. "Nolan," she murmured, her voice trembling, "this is dangerous." "I know," he said, his voice low, rough. But I don't care. He leaned in, and she met him halfway, their lips crashing together in a kiss that was all hunger and need. The storm faded, the world reduced to the taste of salt on his lips, the press of his hands on her waist. It wasn't just passion, it was a release, a collision of two people who'd been running from their own ghosts. They stumbled to a corner of the shelter where a pile of old blankets lay forgotten. Nolan lit a second candle, its glow soft against the wood. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, their hands exploring with a tenderness that surprised her. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, asking without words. She nodded, her fingers tracing his jaw, and they sank onto the blankets, the candlelight painting their skin in gold. Their lovemaking was slow, emotional, a dance of whispers and touches. Every movement felt like a confession, her grief for Jalen, his scars from Lila's betrayal, the weight of their worlds colliding. She clung to him, her nails digging into his shoulders, and he held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. The storm outside roared, but here, in this fragile moment, they were safe, entwined in a way that felt soul-deep. As they lay together afterward, the candle burning low, Amira traced circles on his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. "This doesn't fix anything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Someone's still out there. My gear's gone. Your secrets aren't safe." "I know," he murmured, his lips brushing her forehead, "but we'll face it together. I'm not letting you go." She didn't answer, but her hand tightened on his. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in the storm. Do you believe strangers can connect on a soul-deep level after just one night? Tell us below. Also, if this story is pulling your heart in, show us some love by liking and subscribing. The candle flickered out, leaving them in darkness. Outside, the rain slowed, but Amira knew the real storm was still coming. Nolan's past, her enemies, the missing gear, they were all pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. But for now, in his arms, she let herself believe they could face it. Together. The storm had passed, leaving the boat shelter quiet except for the drip of water from the roof. Amira lay beside Nolan, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The candle was out, but the memory of their night, slow, tender, raw, lingered like a pulse. His arm tightened around her, his breath warm against her hair. "We'll face it together," he'd said, and for a moment she'd let herself believe it. But as dawn crept through the shelter's cracks, reality clawed back. Her apartment was trashed, her diving gear stolen, and someone was hunting her. Nolan's world had collided with hers, and the fallout was far from over. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice low. "Whoever's after me, they're not stopping." Nolan nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll call my team. We'll get you somewhere safe." She wanted to argue. She'd never been one to lean on anyone. But the weight of the past day pressed too hard. She dressed quickly, her clothes still damp, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the beach littered with driftwood from the storm. Nolan followed, his phone already to his ear, his voice clipped as he gave orders. Amira scanned the shore, her skin prickling. The quiet felt wrong, like the calm before a predator strikes. Back at Kofi's friend's place, Amira repacked her bag, her movements mechanical. Nolan stood by the window, watching the road. "My head of security, Elliot, is on his way," he said. "He'll know more." She nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound too sharp. She'd faced danger in the ocean, sharks, riptides, but this was different. This was human, calculated, personal. As she zipped her bag, her fingers brushed something hard, unfamiliar. She frowned, digging deeper, and pulled out a small black device, no bigger than a coin. A red light blinked faintly. Her stomach dropped. "Nolan," she said, holding it up. "What is this?" He crossed the room in 2 strides, his face darkening as he took it. A GPS tracker. Someone's been following you. Her blood ran cold. How long has it been in there? I don't know, he said, crushing the device under his heel. But we're not waiting to find out. We need to move. Before she could respond, a car pulled up outside, a black SUV, sleek and out of place. Elliot stepped out, his suit crisp despite the early hour. He was tall, with a shaved head and eyes that saw too much. He nodded at Nolan, then glanced at Amira, his expression unreadable. Inside, Elliot said, his voice clipped. We need to talk. They sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Elliot set a tablet down, its screen glowing with maps and grainy photos. She's not safe, he said, his gaze on Nolan. Someone wants to silence her. Amira's jaw tightened. Silence me? For what? Saving him? She jerked her head toward Nolan. Elliot's eyes flicked to her, assessing. It's not about the rescue. It's about what you saw. 3 weeks ago, Blue Horizon Beach. You were diving near the cove, right? She frowned, her mind racing. Yeah, I dive there all the time. Why? He tapped the tablet, pulling up a blurry image of the beach at dusk. You witnessed something you weren't supposed to. An arms deal, illegal, off the books. Military-grade weapons, smuggled through a shell company tied to a rival of Mr. Creed's. They didn't know you were there. But when you saved him, you put yourself on their radar. Her breath caught, memories of that evening surfacing. She'd been free-diving, exploring a reef near the cove. There'd been a boat, sleek, unmarked, idling offshore. She'd thought it was odd, but dismissed it. Divers saw strange things sometimes. I didn't see anything, she said, her voice unsteady. Just a boat. I wasn't close. Doesn't matter, Elliot said. They think you did, and they don't take chances. The break-in, the tracker, the stolen gear. It's them. They're tying up loose ends. Nolan's hand clenched into a fist. Why didn't you know about this sooner? He snapped at Elliot. You're supposed to protect her. I'm doing my job, Elliot shot back. But this is bigger than you, sir. These people, they're connected, dangerous, and they know she's linked to you. Amira stood, pacing the small room. Her heart pounded, anger mixing with fear. So I'm a target because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now they think I'm some kind of witness. Exactly, Elliot said, and they'll keep coming unless we stop them. She turned to Nolan, her eyes blazing. This is your world, isn't it? Secrets, deals, enemies. I didn't ask for this. I know, he said, standing to face her, and I'm sorry, but I'm not letting them touch you. I promise. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Your promises don't mean much when I'm the one with a tracker in my bag. He flinched, but didn't look away. Let me fix this, Amira. Please. She wanted to scream, to run, but the memory of their night, the way he'd held her, the way they'd bared their scars, kept her rooted. She didn't trust his world, but she was starting to trust him. What do we do? She asked, her voice low. Elliot leaned forward. We draw them out, set a trap, use you as bait. No, Nolan cut in, his voice like steel. She's not bait. It's the fastest way, Elliot said, unfazed. We control the terms, lure them to a location and take them down. Otherwise, she's running forever. Amira's stomach twisted. The idea of being bait made her skin crawl, but the alternative, living in fear, always looking over her shoulder, was worse. If I do this, she said, her voice steady, it's on my terms. No surprises. Elliot nodded. Deal. Nolan reached for her hand, his touch warm, grounding. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she said, meeting his eyes. I'm not running anymore. The room fell silent, the weight of their plan settling in. Amira didn't know who these people were, but they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated her. She'd faced the ocean's depths and come out alive. She could face this, too. But as she looked at Nolan, his hand still in hers, she knew the real danger wasn't the stalker. It was the bond growing between them, pulling her deeper into a world she might not survive. Amira's hand lingered in Nolan's, his touch a quiet anchor as the weight of their plans settled over the room. The GPS tracker, crushed under his heel, was a stark reminder of the danger closing in. She'd agreed to be bait, to draw out the arms dealers who thought she'd seen too much, but the decision sat heavy in her chest. These weren't currents or storms she could navigate with instinct. These were people, ruthless and calculated, who wanted her silenced. Elliot's plan was clear: lure them to a controlled location, take them down. But as she met Nolan's eyes, filled with both resolve and fear for her, she knew the real risk wasn't just the trap, it was the trust she was placing in him, in his world, where betrayal seemed to lurk in every shadow. "We move tomorrow," Elliot said, sliding his tablet into a case. "I'll set up the location, remote, defensible. Amira, you'll need to be visible, but we'll have eyes on you the whole time." She nodded, her jaw tight. "No mistakes, Elliot. I'm not dying for this." "You won't," Nolan said, his voice firm. "I'll be there." Every step Elliot glanced between them, his expression unreadable, then headed for the door. "Get some rest. We'll reconvene at dawn." As the SUV's engine faded outside, Amira pulled her hand from Nolan's, pacing the small kitchen. "I don't like this," she said, her voice low. "Being bait, trusting your people, it feels like walking into a net." He stepped closer, his presence steady but not crowding. "I know, but Elliot's the best. He's been with me for years. He won't let anything happen to you." She wanted to believe him, but the tracker, the break-in, the stolen gear, they were all proof that someone was always one step ahead. "Years don't mean loyalty," she said, her eyes searching his. "You, of all people, should know that." He flinched, the memory of his ex-fiancée's betrayal flickering across his face. "You're right, but I'm not blind anymore. I'll protect you, Amira, whatever it takes." She held his gaze, the intensity between them reigniting, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You can't trust his circle. Watch your back." Her breath caught, and she showed it to Nolan. His face hardened. "Someone's playing games," he said, pulling out his own phone. "I'm calling Elliot. We're changing the plan." But the seed of doubt had been planted, and as they prepared to move, Amira couldn't shake the feeling that the real threat wasn't just the arms dealers. It was someone closer, someone within Nolan's inner circle. By midday, they'd relocated to a safe house on the outskirts of town, a nondescript house surrounded by pines. Elliot had chosen it for its isolation, perfect for staging the trap. Amira stood by a window, watching the road, when Nolan's phone rang. He answered, his voice low, but his tone shifted, sharp, angry. She turned, catching the tail end of his words. "How the hell did this happen, Brennan?" Brennan, Nolan's closest advisor, a name she'd heard in passing but never met. She moved closer, her pulse quickening. Nolan hung up, his face a storm of fury and betrayal. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes dark. "Someone leaked your location. The arms dealers. They know you're here. Brennan's the only one who had the details." Her blood ran cold. "Your advisor? Why would he do that?" Nolan didn't answer right away. He grabbed his keys, his movements sharp. "Stay here with Elliot. I'm going to find out." "I'm coming with you," she said, stepping in front of him. "This is my life, Nolan. I'm not sitting it out." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but stay close." They drove to a warehouse on the edge of the city, where Brennan was overseeing logistics for the trap. The building was stark, its metal walls glinting under the noon sun. Inside, Brennan stood by a crate, a wiry man in his 50s with graying hair and a face lined with years of loyalty, or so Nolan had thought. He looked up as they entered, his expression flickering with something Amira couldn't place. Guilt? Defiance? "Nolan," Brennan said, setting down a clipboard. "Didn't expect you here." Nolan didn't waste time. He crossed the room, his voice low but lethal. "You used to protect me. Now you put her in the line of fire." "Why, Brennan?" Brennan's eyes darted to Amira, then back to Nolan. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Nolan snapped, stepping closer. "The arms dealers know where she is. You were the only one I told. You sold her out." The air crackled with tension. Amira stood back, her hand near the diving knife in her pocket, ready for anything. Brennan's face hardened, his mask slipping. "You changed when she showed up," he said, his voice cold. "You got soft, Nolan, distracted. I've spent years keeping your empire intact, cleaning up your messes. She's a liability." "A liability?" Nolan's voice was a growl. "She saved my life, and you betrayed me. Us, for what? Money? Power?" Brennan laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think it's that simple? Those dealers offered me a way out, a clean break. You're not the man you were, Nolan. You're chasing a woman who's going to bring you down." Amira's stomach twisted, but she stepped forward, her voice cutting through. "You don't get to decide that. You put a target on my back because you're scared of change. That's pathetic." Brennan's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Nolan grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the crate. "You're done," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You're out, and if anything happens to her, I'll find you." Brennan didn't fight back. He straightened as Nolan released him, his expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said, then turned and walked out, leaving silence in his wake. Amira exhaled, her hands trembling. "Can you trust anyone?" she asked, her voice low. Nolan turned to her, his eyes raw. "I trust you." The words hit harder than she expected, but the weight of Brennan's betrayal lingered. The arms dealers were closing in, and now they knew exactly where she was. The trap was still their best shot, but with Brennan's leak, the stakes were higher. Amira met Nolan's gaze, the bond between them stronger but more dangerous than ever. "We end this," she said. "Tomorrow. No more leaks. No more surprises." He nodded, his hand brushing hers. "Together." As they left the warehouse, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Amira knew the real battle was coming, not just with the dealers, but with the trust they were building, fragile and fierce, in a world that thrived on betrayal. The warehouse's heavy air clung to Amira as she and Nolan stepped into the fading daylight, Brennan's betrayal a fresh wound. His words, "You're chasing a woman who's going to bring you down," echoed in her mind, but Nolan's hand brushing hers grounded her. "We end this tomorrow," she'd said, her voice steady despite the storm of fear and resolve churning inside. The arms dealers were coming, their knowledge of her location a direct line from Brennan's treachery. The trap was still their plan, but trust was fraying, and Amira felt the weight of every step they took. Nolan's eyes, raw with determination, promised protection, but she knew better than to lean too hard on promises in a world built on deceit. They returned to the safe house where Elliot was waiting, his face grim as Nolan filled him in on Brennan's betrayal. "We tighten the circle," Elliot said, his voice clipped. "No one else gets the details. Amira, you stay here tonight. We move at dawn." She nodded, but the walls of the safe house felt too close, the isolation amplifying her unease. Nolan stayed close, his presence a quiet reassurance, but as night fell, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The anonymous text, "You can't trust his circle," gnawed at her. Brennan was gone, but what if he wasn't the only leak? Against Elliot's advice, Amira insisted on returning to her apartment one last time. I need my own space, she told Nolan, her tone firm. Just for a few hours. I'll be back before the trap. He protested, but she was stubborn. The ocean had taught her to face danger head-on, and hiding felt like surrender. Reluctantly, he agreed, stationing 2 of his men outside her building. Her apartment was still a mess from the break-in, the absence of her diving gear a stark reminder of the threat. She moved quickly, grabbing a few essentials, a jacket, her mother's photo, her diving knife. As she zipped her bag, the lights flickered. Her pulse spiked. She reached for the knife, but the door crashed open, and 3 men in dark tactical gear stormed in. She fought, landing a kick to one's knee, but a cloth pressed over her mouth, and the world went black. When she came to, her head throbbed, and her wrists were bound behind her. The air was thick with rust and oil, the ground cold beneath her. She was in an abandoned shipyard, rusted hulls looming like ghosts in the dim light of a single bulb. The men stood a few feet away, their faces obscured by shadows. One, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek, crouched in front of her, his voice low and mocking. "You should have stayed underwater, fish girl." Her jaw clenched, fear mixing with defiance. "What do you want?" she spat, her voice hoarse. He smirked, standing. "You saw something you shouldn't have. Bad luck, that's all." The arms deal. The boat she'd glimpsed weeks ago, the one Elliot said tied her to this nightmare. She hadn't seen enough to threaten them, but they didn't care. She was a loose end, and they were here to cut it. Her mind raced, searching for an out, but the ropes were tight and the shipyard felt like a tomb. Meanwhile, Nolan was losing it. He'd been at the safe house when Elliot got the call from the men stationed at Amira's apartment. "She's gone," one said, voice tense. "They hit fast. We found signs of a struggle." Nolan's world tilted, rage and panic surging through him. He grabbed his phone, barking orders to Elliot. "Find her. Now. Pull every resource we have." Elliot's team traced a signal to the shipyard, a sprawling maze on the coast. Nolan didn't wait for a full plan. He climbed into an SUV with Elliot and a private tactical team, his mind a blur of Amira's face, her fierce eyes, her steady voice, the way she'd trusted him despite everything. He'd promised to protect her, and now she was in danger because of his world, his failures. "If they touch her," he said, his voice low, lethal, "they're dead." At the shipyard, Amira sat against a rusted beam, her eyes scanning for weaknesses. The scarred man was on a call, his voice low. "Yeah, we've got her. Creed's people will show. Make it quick." Her stomach twisted. They were using her to lure Nolan, to clean up their mess in one strike. She tugged at the ropes, her wrists raw, but they held fast. Footsteps echoed outside, and the men tensed, drawing weapons. The scarred man grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet. "Time to move," he growled, pressing a gun to her back. She stumbled forward, her heart pounding, but her mind stayed sharp. She'd survived the ocean's depths. She could survive this. Headlights cut through the darkness as Nolan's team arrived, tires crunching on gravel. The scarred man shoved Amira into an open area surrounded by towering ship husks. "Stay quiet," he hissed, "or you're done." But Amira wasn't one to stay quiet. She caught a glimpse of movement, Elliot's team fanning out, shadows among the ruins. Nolan stepped into the light, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Let her go," he called, his voice carrying over the wind. "This ends now." The scarred man laughed, his grip tightening on Amira. "You don't call the shots, Creed. You want her. Pay up, or she's collateral damage." Amira met Nolan's eyes, her fear buried under resolve. She wasn't just a hostage, she was a fighter. She shifted her weight, testing the man's hold, waiting for a moment. Nolan's team was closing in, their movements silent but precise. The negotiation was a stall, a distraction, and she knew it. "I'm not here to bargain," Nolan said, his voice steady but edged with steel. "You let her go, or my team takes you apart." The scarred man hesitated, his gun wavering. Amira seized the chance, driving her elbow into his gut. He grunted, loosening his grip, and she dove behind a crate as gunfire erupted. Nolan's team moved like a machine, neutralizing two of the men in seconds. The scarred man recovered, firing wildly, but Elliot tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Nolan ran to Amira, cutting her ropes with a knife. "Are you okay?" he asked, his hands trembling as he checked her for injuries. She nodded, her breath ragged. "I'm fine. Let's finish this." The shipyard fell silent, the arms dealers subdued, but Amira knew it wasn't over. Someone had sent them, someone bigger than Brennan, and they wouldn't stop. As Nolan pulled her close, his relief palpable, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. A fight not just for her life, but for the truth they were both chasing. The shipyard's air was thick with tension, the echoes of gunfire fading as Elliot's team secured the arms dealers. Amira leaned against Nolan, her wrists still raw from the ropes, his arms steady around her. The scarred man's words, "You should have stayed underwater, fish girl," rang in her ears, but she'd fought back, survived. Nolan's relief was palpable, his breath uneven as he held her. But the victory felt fragile. The dealers were down, but someone bigger was pulling the strings, someone who'd used Brennan's betrayal and the arms deal to target her. The truth was still out there, and Amira knew they weren't safe yet. "We need to go," she said, pulling back, her voice hoarse but firm. "This isn't over." Nolan nodded, his jaw tight. "Elliot's cleaning up. We'll get you out of here." But before they could move, a low rumble shook the ground. Amira's eyes darted to the shadows where a new group of men emerged, reinforcements, armed and moving fast. The scarred man, now cuffed, laughed darkly from the ground. "You thought it'd be that easy," Elliot shouted orders, his team regrouping. But the new attackers were closing in, their weapons trained. Amira's heart pounded. The shipyard was a maze of rusted hulls and crates, but it was also a trap, and they were cornered. She grabbed Nolan's hand, her mind racing. "We need a way out, now." He scanned the area, his face grim. "There's a dock at the edge. If we can get to the water, then we swim," she finished, her diver's instincts kicking in. The ocean was her domain, and she'd outsmarted worse than this. She spotted a crate nearby, its label faded but familiar, diving supplies likely confiscated from a smuggler's haul. Her eyes locked onto a flare gun and a coil of rope. An idea sparked, one born from years of navigating the sea's dangers. "Cover me," she told Nolan, darting to the crate. He hesitated, then nodded, drawing a pistol from Elliot's team and firing to keep the attackers at bay. Amira grabbed the flare gun, a canister of compressed air, and the rope, her hands moving with practiced speed. She'd learned a trick as a diver, a way to disorient and escape using the tools at hand. The shipyard's edge was bordered by a shallow channel, murky and lined with debris. It wasn't deep, but it was enough. She tied the rope to a rusted beam, securing it as a guide to the water. The attackers were closing in, their shouts sharp over the gunfire. Amira loaded the flare gun, her pulse steady despite the chaos. "When I say go," she told Nolan, "we run for the channel. Follow the rope." He looked at her, trust overriding his fear. "Got it." She aimed the flare gun at a pile of oil drums near the attackers, firing a blazing streak that ignited the air. The explosion was small, but loud, a burst of light and smoke that sent the men scrambling. In the same moment, she cracked the compressed air canister, tossing it into the shallow water at the channel's edge. It hissed, releasing a cloud of bubbles and mist, obscuring their path. "Go!" she shouted, grabbing the rope and sprinting for the water. Nolan followed, their footsteps pounding as bullets whizzed past. The rope led them through the mist, the channel's edge appearing like a lifeline. Amira dove in, the cold water a shock but familiar, and Nolan splashed in behind her. They swam low, using the mist and debris for cover, the rope guiding them to a narrow outlet where the channel met the open sea. They surfaced behind a rusted barge, gasping for air. The shipyard was chaos, shouts, gunfire, the flare's glow fading. Amira's trick had bought them time, but the attackers would regroup. She scanned the shore, spotting a black SUV speeding toward them. Elliot's team, or worse. But as it stopped, Nolan's face lit with relief. "It's ours." They climbed out, dripping and shivering, and ran for the SUV. Elliot was at the wheel, his face taut. "Get in," he barked. Amira dove into the back, Nolan beside her, and the vehicle peeled out, leaving the shipyard behind. She leaned against him, her body trembling from cold and adrenaline, and he pulled her close, his arms a shield against the world. "You're incredible," he murmured, his voice raw. "You outsmarted them." She managed a shaky smile. Just another day in the water. But her mind was already racing ahead. The arms dealers, Brennan's betrayal, the tracker, they were all connected to something bigger, and she was still a target. As the SUV sped toward Nolan's estate, she knew the fight wasn't over. But for now, she let herself lean into him, the warmth of his body a reminder that she wasn't alone. At the estate, a fortress of glass and steel perched on a cliff, Amira showered and changed into dry clothes, a soft sweater and jeans from Nolan's staff. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her raw, exposed. She found Nolan in his study, the ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood by the desk, his face etched with exhaustion and something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or love. He turned as she entered, and before she could speak, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened, then melted into him, the weight of the day crashing down. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, his voice breaking. "When they took you, I'm here," she said, her hands gripping his shirt. "I'm okay." He pulled back, his green eyes searching hers. "You didn't just save my life, Amira. You gave me a reason to want it again." Her breath caught, his words piercing the walls she'd built. She'd spent years guarding herself, keeping the world at arm's length. But Nolan had slipped through. His pain, his strength, his unwavering need to protect her. She didn't know if it was love. Not yet. But it was something that burned, something that made her want to risk everything. "You're not so bad yourself," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But we're not done. Someone's still out there." "I know," he said, his hand cupping her face, "but we'll face it together. No more secrets, no more betrayals. Just us." She nodded, leaning into his touch. The ocean outside was calm, a stark contrast to the storm they'd survived. But Amira knew the real battle was coming. The mastermind behind the arms deal, the one who'd turned her life into a target. She was ready, not just for herself, but for him. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, you were willing to risk everything for them? Drop your answer below and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. As they stood there, the estate's quiet wrapping around them, Amira felt the weight of their bond. It was fragile, forged in danger and desire, but it was real. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. The ocean had brought them together, and now it would carry them forward, into the unknown, but together. Amira stood in Nolan's study, his words, "You gave me a reason to want it again," still resonating as she leaned into his embrace. The estate's glass walls framed the ocean, calm and vast, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd escaped at the shipyard. Her body ached from the ordeal, but Nolan's warmth anchored her, his promise of just us, a fragile hope she clung to. The arms dealers were in custody, Brennan's betrayal exposed, But the mastermind behind it all remained a shadow, a threat that lingered like a storm on the horizon. For now, though, they were safe, and Amira let herself breathe, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "We'll find them," Nolan murmured, his lips brushing her forehead. "Whoever's behind this, they won't touch you again." She nodded, but her mind was already turning. The ocean had always been her refuge, her purpose, and now it was tied to him, to their fight, their bond. "I'm not running anymore," she said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "But I need more than survival. I need to do something that matters." He smiled, soft but certain. "Then let's do it together." 6 months later, the sun hung low over Blue Horizon Beach, painting the waves in hues of gold and rose. Amira stood on the shore, her bare feet sinking into the sand, her braided hair swaying in the breeze. The beach was alive with activity, volunteers setting up tables, divers hauling equipment, and a small crowd gathered for the launch of the Creed Lane Marine Conservation Foundation. She and Nolan had built it from the ground up, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the ocean she loved, from cleaning up illegal fishing nets to rehabilitating marine life. It was her purpose reborn, and his redemption, a way to channel their shared scars into something that healed. Nolan was across the beach, talking to a group of donors, his easy smile a far cry from the haunted man she'd pulled from the water. He'd stepped back from his CEO role, delegating to focus on the foundation, on her. The arms deal investigation was ongoing, with Elliot's team closing in on the mastermind, a shadowy figure tied to Nolan's rival. But for now, the threat was distant, and Amira felt free for the first time in years. She adjusted the sign on a table, her fingers tracing the foundation's logo, a dolphin leaping over a wave, a symbol of freedom and resilience. A volunteer, a young woman named Maya, approached, her eyes bright. "Amira, the divers are ready for the reef cleanup demo. You want to lead it?" Amira glanced at the water, its pull as strong as ever. "Give me 10 minutes, she said, smiling. "I need to check on something." She walked toward the cliffs, where the beach curved into a quiet cove, the same spot where she'd saved Nolan. The memory was vivid, his pale face, his rasping, "You're real," but it no longer felt like a wound. It was the start of them, of this life they were building. She stood at the water's edge, the tide lapping at her toes, when she heard his footsteps behind her. "Thought I'd find you here," Nolan said, his voice warm. He stepped beside her, his jeans rolled up, his white shirt open at the collar. The wind tousled his hair, and his green eyes held a softness that still caught her off guard. "It's home," she said, her gaze on the horizon. "Always will be." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "You've made it more than that. This foundation, what we're doing, it's changing things. You're changing things." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "We're doing it together, Nolan. Don't put this all on me." He turned to face her, his expression shifting, serious but not heavy. "I mean it, Amira. You didn't just save me that day. You showed me what I was missing, a reason to fight, to build something real. With you." Her chest tightened, his words stirring the same spark she'd felt in the boat shelter, in the shipyard, in every moment they'd faced the world side by side. She started to speak, but he held up a hand, his smile almost shy. "Let me say this," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, weathered shell, smooth from years in the sea. Inside it, nestled against the pearlescent curve, was a simple ring, white gold, set with a single aquamarine that caught the light like the ocean itself. Her breath caught. "This isn't a grand scene," he said, his voice low, intimate. "No cameras, no crowd, just us, where it started. Amira, this time, I want to be the one saving you, from the life you were never meant to settle for. Marry me." For a moment she couldn't speak, her heart pounding as the weight of his words settled. She'd spent so long guarding herself, running from ties, from pain. But Nolan wasn't a cage. He was a partner, a man who'd faced her storms and stayed. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the certainty that this was right. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, a smile breaking through. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the shell falling into her palm, and pulled her into a kiss, slow, deep, tasting of salt and promise. The world fell away, the crash of waves their only witness. In the distance, a pod of dolphins leaped, their arcs catching the fading light, a symbol of the freedom and love they'd fought for. Amira laughed against his lips, her hands framing his face, and he held her tighter, as if he'd never let go. They stood there, wrapped in each other, until the sun dipped below the horizon. The Foundation's launch continued behind them, laughter and music drifting on the breeze. But this moment was theirs. Amira looked at the ring, its stone glinting like the sea, and felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. The ocean had brought them together, and now it was their shared purpose, their home. Back at the launch, they rejoined the crowd, hand in hand. Maya caught Amira's eye, noticing the ring, and grinned but said nothing. Nolan gave a short speech, his voice steady as he spoke of the Foundation's mission, but his eyes kept finding Amira, a silent promise in every glance. She stood by the water's edge, watching the volunteers, the divers, the community they'd built. The threat of the mastermind still loomed, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer just a diver, a survivor. She was a partner, a creator, a woman who'd found love in the chaos. As the event wound down, Amira and Nolan walked back to the cove, the stars emerging above. "We're not done fighting," she said, her voice soft but sure. "But this is worth it." He kissed her forehead, his arm around her. "Always." Do you believe that love born from chaos can bring healing? Share your thoughts and be sure to join our family by subscribing. More beautiful stories are coming your way.